really epitomises the idea of colonialism, the word Victoria, not just here, right around the globe. And it's still an unresolved issue, the occupation. They talk about settlement and colonialism. Settlement. There's no settlement in this country. There's no consent. And there's evidence of that. There's no treaties. Obviously, no jurisdiction. And colonialism is another name for an illegal occupation and crimes against humanity, basically. That's what it represents to me. It's not decolonised this land yet. And we have names. My people are the Crowatungalang, the Japwarong, and my mother's and father's people. We have identities. We have human rights. We have humanity, and we have genius. And all my life I've seen anthropology, archaeology, all these other ologies. They've gleaned a lot of information from our people. Nothing of it comes back. None of it. Our people's material and physical culture, the museums, the colonial museums around the world are full of it. What don't they understand about our people? So I'm happy to be here and to try to explain where we're at in terms of colonialism today. It hasn't, like I said, there's no settlement. And it's a real issue for us. It's an ongoing crime here.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. It's your work is very, very important. So this is why today we wanted to have a conversation about the meaning also of Black Lives Matter and what it means today, but also reflecting on an intergenerational question, what the new generations are doing and how they position themselves along the lines of what previous generations have been doing. So this is why I think it's very important to talk to the elders. But let me introduce briefly what we're going to say today. Also because we are experiencing a wave of anti-racism protests around the globe like never before, and the level of awareness and support demonstrated by different people across the globe, from the private to the public sector, is symbolic of some interesting changes and our entrance into 2020. Now, I think it's important also to look into Aboriginal activism and why we are seeing now this rise in consciousness and also all the support, but where it stems from is also another key issue. Aboriginal activism is nothing new. It's always been there. It's been there for a very long time. There is a long record of achievements that show how politically engaged and justice-seeking individuals and groups, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, have fought to advance the Indigenous cause by confronting Australia's colonial past, the present forms of colonialism, and the enduring legacies of dispossession and colonial violence that are still felt by Indigenous peoples today, as Robbie just said. Now, Australian Indigenous activism has been investigated and addressed by many scholars, and I won't really delve into this work right now due to time constrictions, but its continuing transformations are yet to be fully examined, as the digital media allow for new discourses, alliances, and communities to emerge. Also, the term community needs to be in some ways problematized, but it's very important to understand how new communities of practice and activism emerge through the social media. Now, new spaces have opened up with the Australian public sphere and its counter-publics, and such spaces are indeed imposing themselves as new emerging counter-public voices, counter-public spheres that allow for productive public debates and for Indigenous voices to emerge with strength. But before getting into this particular discussion, which we will address in the second part of the presentation by looking at different forms of digital activism, it's important also to contextualize the phenomenon and the fact that it has original and specific claims. Now, we know how the Black Lives Matter movement originated after Trayvon Martin's tragic death and the need to put an end to the cruel deaths of Black people at the hand of the police. Now, since then, the Black Lives Matter movement has traveled to different countries, reaching different parts of the globe, and really finding a stronghold in countries like Canada, the UK, and Australia, just to name a few. But the phrase Black Lives Matter has been adopted, I would say co-opted by activists in these respective countries to show solidarity with what's been happening in America, and at the same time to address domestic issues within those countries. So we see a flourishing of different terms such as Native Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, Aboriginal Lives Matter, and so on and so forth. And this debate is quite interesting actually, because it also touches on questions around identity and again, what constitutes an Aboriginal identity in Australia. In Australia in particular, the problem of black cats in custody has constituted an ongoing preoccupation for Indigenous peoples and their allies as well. But the American events have really helped reignite those sentiments. And I had a discussion with Robbie about this, about the meaning of all this and the connections, these transcultural and transatlantic, in some ways, connections, the importance of those struggles and how they're framed in Australia as well. Now, there have been several debates. Also, there are different critical views around embracing the Black Lives Matter movement in Australia. In fact, the Black Lives Matter movement and its international voices are affirming that Black lives do matter and Black lives are important because they've been neglected for so long, and due to systemic racism and due to other forms of imperialism and colonialism. Now, it's quite interesting also that the level of solidarity found across different walks of life and different people, it's been quite important. But this is something that the social media have helped spread, have helped actually reinforce. The protests, in fact, seem to have accelerated this process of recognition of the historical injustices against Aboriginal people, as the Australian also state of Victoria now will be the first to set up a truth and justice process, which will work in tandem with the current discussions about treaties. And now, which is really important because it seems that while there's criticism around the appropriation of the Black Lives Matter movement to define black cats in custody, at the same time, we see that this media attention has also helped create something practical. So we also need to understand that there's been a long history of attempts at trying to shed light on what's happening within Indigenous communities around Australia. Over the past 30 years, for instance, there has been a series of symbolic gestures that haven't really led to actual outcomes. For instance, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Vets in Custody, which was established in 1991, while has identified some problems, hasn't really led to any specific positive aspects in relation to identifying or actually even convicting police officers or institutions for their crimes. And it's really important because out of more than 400 vets in custody, in police custody, or in police prison or in prisons, we don't have, they're currently only investigating 2 police officers. Well, we've got 2 cases happening at this time, but no one has ever been convicted of a crime. So it's really important to explore this history of institutionalized racism in Australia, which is something very present. And it's very important to also understand how this is happening and why this is happening. And I think some statistics will help also those who don't have or not very familiar with the situation in Australia. It is an emergency, and as we can see here, the Indigenous population makes up only 3% of the entire Australian population, but Aboriginal people are overrepresented in the prison system, having 30% of Aboriginal people in prisons. Now, an alarming also datum is that the fastest growing population is of Indigenous women now getting incarcerated, and we also have some really big cases like that of Tanya Day, who need to be investigated thoroughly, and abuses at the hands of the police need to be investigated right now. So since 2004, also a number of Aboriginal people in custody have really increased. So we see the numbers are increasing instead of decreasing. And this is another alarming issue. So there are a number of websites and places where you can get information. And I think that the work of The Guardian actually, and people who work for The Guardian, has been really pivotal, because we see that apart from what you can read here, and I will point to this resource, which is quite important, The Guardian has decided to start an important project, which is called That's Inside. it's a database with all the Indigenous that's in prison or at the end of the police, and all the significant statistics are here. But more than the statistics, we also have, because statistics are very problematic as well, and we need to be able to read the statistics in light of the actual context, in light of the stories of each person, and we need to give each person a name and understand why they are dying. So sometimes, you know, we see that suicide is one of the causes, but we need to investigate why this is happening. And also health issues, but why are so many Indigenous people dying in prisons? Because of neglect, and as research has pointed out, because of bias, deep bias against Indigenous people in Australia. And Robbie knows a lot about it.
Sorry, Chiara, could you just share your screen again?
It's not showing.
Could you just share it again, please?
Okay, sorry.
No, that's all right.
I thought. Yeah,
no, it's a slight miscommunication.
Okay, did it stop? Because I
there
thought.
Here we go. Now it's back. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me do this. Can you? It's I think it's frozen. Perhaps. Yeah. Okay. So can you see it now?
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So this is a link, and I will put this up on Slack. So all the links, I don't know if you've seen these are some of the statistics, but it says statistics need to be contextualized. So please also visit this website and other resources that you can access. And it's very important to know a bit more about this. But now, you know, before getting into some of the questions that are in the, sorry, going back, some of the aspects that pertain to the digital activism, I would like to actually ask Robbie about his own experience, and if you can tell me, Robbie, a bit more about the Black Lives Matter movement in Australia, where it originates from, and you know, if you think it's relevant to keep the slogan Black Vets in Custody or Black Lives Matter. So we had a discussion about this, and you've got strong views.
Black Lives Matter is certainly put a spotlight on our issues here in Australia, and you know, our people dying in custody in this country has become normalised, and you know, it's been over 400 and I think 430 deaths since they had a royal commission inquiry. Since that inquiry, a royal commission, not that, you know, they're worth anything, but it's become sort of normalised. The incarceration rates are astronomical. Why? You look at the youth incarceration rates in the Northern Territory is 100% Indigenous. I hate the idea of that word, Indigenous, but you know, it's 100% incarceration. This is our land we're talking about. This is a country that's built on an idea, like an updated version of the doctrine of discovery. It's terra nullius. They didn't even bother to engage with consent or treaties. And Australia is probably the last inhabitable continent colonised by and the British, who colonised 76 other countries around the world, all had treaties. This one hasn't got one. And you know, that means what? The war hasn't ended. And there's an argument every 26th of January in this country, whether it's a peacefully settled society or an invaded one. And that sort of protest has been going on as long as I've been around. And you know, I'm getting into my 60s now, so you know, it's been going on for a long time. And I remember a time when, you know, we engaged with the Black Power movement, which is the Black Empowerment movement, and you know, we met members of that group back in the day. We had chapters of the Black Power movement here in Australia, and we've been growing alongside that. We're just a small group of people here. You know, we're totally outnumbered. It's not like it's South Africa. Like we're a very small population of our own country. And only 250 years ago, it was 100% black and Aboriginal. And that's drastically changed You know, this country's out of sight, out of mind. Britain's had its way here, and continues to deceive and fraud and fool everybody. But our issues are, like I said before, it's the unresolved issues of genocide, the acknowledgement of our land, our law. We've got an ancient law that precedes non-Aboriginal people in this country. It needs to be recognised. It's at your own peril that you don't. And the other thing is they haven't got any consensual documents here, like a peace accord treaties. They haven't got consent, despite being specifically told to get consent by their legal authorities. And where do we stand here? And the whole world's been trading on our stolen wealth here for a long time, in particular the United Kingdom. And the interpretation of who and what we are is always done by non-Aboriginal people. They won't go to the source. And we've been telling them. And our law, our medicine, and our science is starting to come back to the fore, like we always knew it would. But this game continues, and our people continue to die in custody as a result of this this embedded, ingrained, institutionalised racism. What this country represents. This is a neo-coloniser. This built on the idea of military, prison, industrial complexes. It started as a convict penal colony, something like a forerunner to a Guantanamo Bay. And we fill these jails in our own country. There's a whole industry built around our misery, our grief. And no one's hearing us. And we're still connected to this country in a spiritual way. And that spiritual way is a dimension of knowledge that people don't understand. And when we first seen the colonisers come to our country, we thought it was a zombie apocalypse. And we've managed to survive that genocide, that intentional genocide and the terrorism and the outcomes of all of that for so long. And it's an incredible story of resistance here. And I'm proud to be a Holocaust survivor, colonised refugee, fringe and ghetto dweller in my own country. And we're quite capable of looking after our own affairs. We're quite capable of looking after our children, our heritage, our inheritance. Every aspect of our life is controlled by non-Aboriginal people, and yet we're blamed with all the we're blamed for mismanagement and all that sort of stuff. But the time has come, folks. This is it. The game's over, and it's time to recognise our unceded sovereignty, our connection to the divine law here. That's what we hold, and we will never let that go. Doesn't matter who you are, king, queen, doesn't matter who you are. Our law stood for hundreds of thousands of years sustainably in our own land, if you don't mind. We can't get a job in our own country. And like the anthropologists, the archaeologists, they were hovering around us like vultures, waiting for us to die so they can get access to our intellectual property. It's like when we were in the reserves, we spent generations in these reserves, and they were waiting for us to die. This is the whole idea of terra nullius, the empty land. The whole country's been living on that life for a long time. The whole world's been living on that. And our connection to Black Lives Matter, that's what it's always been about. It's just different terminology. There's nothing different between, to me, about Black Lives Matter and deaths in custody. It's dying at the hands of this criminal, this thing called colonialism and institutionalised racism. Australia's something else. It's constitutionalised racism here. White-only policy constitution. We're out of sight, out of mind, hidden away. Like I said, we were 100% of the population only 250 years ago. This is, and this country here has been feeding the rest of these other colonisers. Like I said, there's relationships between the colonisers and the people who are fighting for their independence. They're global networks. And ours has been going on for a long, long time. Our resistance began the day Europeans turned up on our territorial waters and breached our maritime law and their maritime law and everything else. Everything is a lie and a deceit and fraud ever since. So that's my take on it. I don't know if that's made it any clearer, but we're quite capable of taking care of our own affairs and interpreting who we are and what we are if we're given an opportunity. And that's the beauty of social media these days. It's opened up that world to our people for the first time. And that's why we can connect. That's all we do is struggle in our own country. And if you have a look at the statistical information, you'd think there's a war going on here. And it needs to end. It needs to be acknowledged. It needs to end. And we're quite, our culture is about sharing and caring. We don't own anything. We're the caretakers, the custodians, and the guardians of something that's very sacred to us, the creation. We're a part of that. Our people are a part of the ecology. We know where we fit in it, like all Indigenous people. Colonialism is the mother of all pandemics and unsustainable, and it's going to fall over real soon, as we can all see. So it's time to, this doesn't need to be happening. Our people living in misery in their own country and dying at the rate we are at the hands of foreigners.
Thank you, Robbie. Actually, we do understand the grief, and I think now you have 50 people at least listening to you and understanding all that. And we have a question that you might want to answer.
There was another death in custody last night here in New South Wales. An Aboriginal woman died in custody last night. It just goes on and on and on and on. And like we're a small group of people. We feel all of these deaths. They're family. They're our people. But like I said, we're becoming normalised to it. So I'm so glad that Black Lives has shone the spotlight on Australia, and I'm thankful for that.
Are we done with our time?
Actually, we are, and I'm afraid that we cannot take many questions, but there was a very interesting one from Catherine, and maybe Robbie would like to very briefly in 1 or 2 sentences answer. The question focuses on the main obstacle. What do you see as a main obstacle as regards to the fundamental precondition for change and justice, which is the treaty? Can you answer that very briefly, please?
This country just needs to act legally, morally, ethically. That's all they need to do. And, we want our day in court, our people. We've had no justice. Put it out there. Where's the International Criminal Court? What happened to the United Nations Genocide Convention? If that had been implemented when it was supposed to have been implemented in this country, it would have saved a lot of people being stolen from their mothers, and a lot of deaths in custody would have stopped then. Why can't those international legal conventions be applied to this country? And what are other countries doing about dealing with this country? It's a pariah. It should be sanctioned and boycotted like South Africa was. Because they're not going to change here. This country was built on lies, deceit, fraud, and a monumental theft, the stolen wealth. So, like Chiara said, there's a truth commission going on attached to this this domestic version of a treaty. It can't go down like that. This needs to be exposed on a global level, and our concerns have to be played out there in where there's an unbiased umpire or an unbiased judging on it. We can't get any justice in our own country. The whole institution, the whole constitution is criminal and foreign to us. So that needs to happen. That means people becoming more aware, which is happening, and this is going to happen sooner or later. I'd like to see a writ going into the International Criminal Court. If there's lawyers out there around the world who think that we've got a case here, can they take us into this International Criminal Court? Now we couldn't get into the United Nations. We weren't part of the member state sort of thing. How is this country, Australia, a member state of the United Nations, and they don't adhere to none of the convention law? So let's make them account. That's what we need to do as a global community.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'm sure that many of us do have some questions, but we need to stop here before the lunch break. And I would encourage all the participants to share their questions with you via the given links, Slack or email. And I'm sure Chiara is going to help us with that communication. If
I will. Yeah, if you can. Yeah, I was going to say, if you can just send also messages or direct them to me for Robbie, I will let him know and respond, because yeah, we need to set up Robbie on Slack.
Yeah, I wish we could continue.
Yeah, so we were going to touch on other topics, but yeah, we ran out of time, obviously, and I didn't want to stop Robbie because it was saying, you know, something very important. So we had to kind of stop there. But there are many other dimensions to this movement, which are very interesting, also in relation to the trans and intergenerational aspects of it. And you know, it is very important to have people like Robbie who are in a different generation also talk about these issues.
Yeah, social media awareness and the difference between the generations, and obviously the global appeal. So thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation and Robbie's really important insights, so that we could better understand how it feels from inside the movement. Thank you very much. And I encourage all of you to have a lunch break and then return in time. And I leave it on Michael to give you instructions on timing and beginning of the afternoon session. For us, it is afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so